Hey everybody, this is a toolkit for Unit 5, Lesson 1, Investigation 3, Factoring Quadratic Expressions. Alright, so what does this mean? What does factoring mean? Factoring is rewriting a quadratic expression or equation, and we're going to put that rewritten form into the product of two linear expressions or equations. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, first, when we start, we're talking about the standard form of our quadratic expression or a quadratic equation. And we're going to end with the factored form of the quadratic expression. So that's what linear expressions are. Linear expressions, x plus 2, x minus 5, 3x plus 2. It's basically those things that would make a straight line, right? So when you multiply two of those linear expressions together, you get a quadratic equation. Or expression. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to take it from standard form and put it into factored form. Now, that standard form is x squared plus bx plus c. And when we looked at expanding to get into standard form, we saw that we had a relationship between b and c. C was the product of two numbers, so two numbers multiplied together, and B was the sum of those same two numbers. So if we could find whatever product that we need for C, then we'd get B. So in essence, we're looking for two numbers that multiply together to get C, right? Multiply together to get C, and that when we add together, they get B. That's really what we're doing when we're trying to factor a quadratic expression. Okay, so let's start with an example. We're going to start with a nice tough one. X squared plus 19x plus 60. So we need to find what factors of 60, what numbers multiply together to get 60, that add together to get 19. Now, I don't know off the top of my head all the different factors of 60 and how they are going to add together. So what I usually do is off to the side of my paper, is I'll set up 60 and I'll start working through the factors. So I've got 1 times 60. Well, if I add those up, that'll be 61. I've got 2 times 30. If I add those, that's going to be 32. 3 times 20, well, that's 23. And 4 times 15, okay, wait, now that's going to be 19. So that's our one that we're looking for. So we would just rewrite this then in factored form. Both 4 and 15 are both positive values. So we have x plus 4 times x plus 15. And that's now factored. All right, let's look at another one. Let's look at x squared minus x minus 56. Okay, so we've got some weird negative signs in here kind of playing with us a little bit. So we're going to look for, again, the relationship between negative 56 and negative 1. So I start my list. I've got positive 1 and negative 56 and negative 1 and positive 56. Because I've got to multiply these things to get together to get a negative 56. So to do that, one number has to be positive, one has to be negative. But now when I add these things together, I'm going to get a negative 55 for the first one, and I'll get a positive 55 for the second one. Now clearly this is not going to be the relationship, or these are not going to be the numbers we're looking for because they're so big, so far away from negative 1. But let's take note of something here. When we make the bigger number negative, we end up with a negative value as our result. So we could go through positive and negative positive for all of our different factors, but if we know that half of them are going to give us a positive value and half are going to get a negative, we can eliminate that whole positive side and just look at the negative values, the ones that will result in a negative value, I should say. So let's do that. Let's focus on that. So we could have positive 2 and negative 28. Well, that would give us a negative 26, too big. Positive 4 and negative 18. Okay, that's negative 14, still not there. Positive 7 and negative 8. Aha! Okay, so that's going to give us a value of negative 1. So now we have a positive 7 and a negative 8. So when we put it into factored form, we're going to have x plus 7, x minus 8. Okay, so that's x squared minus x minus 56 squared. All right, last one. Oh, sorry, before we get to the last one, notice that I did this for both of the first problem and this problem. Notice that I kind of kept things in order. So I was going down, I wasn't just jumping around. With my front number, I was kind of decreasing or increasing at a regular rate. So that way I can kind of keep my thoughts organized and I'm not missing anything as I'm doing my factor or I'm looking for my factors. So just a little hint as you're sorting through this as well. Okay, so now let's look at our last example. Negative 16x squared plus 24x. Now you're probably like, wait a minute, hold on a second. Where's our c? Well, our c would be like if we were adding 0 on here. Okay, so if we're looking for the products of 0 and that add together to get 24, well, that's going to be kind of off because how does this negative 16 come into play? So when we look at the relationship of these things, we'd have to think about negative 16 as well. And that's just kind of weird. That's not fitting into what we're doing here. So the other thing we can do is we can look at the two values that we have, the negative 16x squared and the 24x, and we can look to see is there anything common between these two terms. Well, both of them have x's in them, and both of them are also factors or divisible by 8. So what we can do is we can factor out an 8x. And now when we're looking to see what goes inside the parentheses, we can say, well, what does 8x have to be multiplied by to get a negative 16x squared? Well, that would have to be a negative 2x. And what would 8x have to be multiplied by to get a positive 24x? Well, that's just a positive 3. So here's our factored form for this. So we could also do 8x plus 0 if we wanted, but this works just like this as well. Now, some people will factor out a negative sign as well. So you might see negative 8x, and then what you would have to do is you'd have to change the signs inside the parentheses. So that's also an option. Both of these two things are correct. Now, so something to think about when you're looking at this is if the coefficient of x squared is not positive 1, look to see if you have anything, if there's any common values or common factors between the terms that you have listed. And I say every term or every part of the quadratic expression that's listed there. So you can't just factor out something from one piece and not the other. It's got to be factored out of everything that you have listed. So that's a little helpful hint if you have this weird thing like the negative 16 in front, that, okay, maybe there's something common that I could factor out before I start my factoring of my x squareds and my x's. So, so hopefully that's helpful, and we will talk to you in the next toolkit.